Johan, are we ready to go? Do we have a minute? Johan,
Yes, Chair.
are we ready to go?
We can go, Chair. We're ready to go. IT is also ready.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, members and staff and guests on the platform and officials from the department. My name is Derek America. I'm the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Local Government. Today is the 14th of September 2021, and this meeting is taking place on the MS Teams platform, and it is also live on our YouTube channel for whoever might be interested in our proceedings today. My extend a warm by the department with a unsigned
Chairperson, we're losing you there a bit.
Same on my side.
Same on my side. Mornings. I thought it was on my side, but
morning. I also thought it was mine.
Now. Bad network quality. Can anybody hear me? Okay, let me. I think it is the weather here, so I'm just going to activate my mobile hotspot. So possibly it will make it easier to. Let's just turn this thing off here. Let's just do this. Okay. Is the connection better now, colleagues?
Chair, can I propose that you perhaps switch off your video?
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'll do that. But
Chair,
I
we've
think
lost
he's
you now
gone now.
completely. I think you
yeah,
may just
sorry.
be switching from.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
We hear you
Yes,
well now.
Chair.
Thank you.
Loud and clear. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me start all over again. Today is the 14th of September 2021, and this is the Standing Committee on Local Governments meeting. A warm welcome to all members present, staff that provide technical and logistical assistance to the committee, to all our guests, and to the departmental officials. Our agenda for today is we will have a briefing by the department on the collaboration with the Hans Seidel Foundation to address the capacity and financial stability of municipalities, and then we will elucidate some sort of resolutions and actions that may flow from the presentation, and thereafter we will be dealing with some administration of the committee. So colleagues and guests, that this meeting is taking place on the MS Team platform and is also live on the YouTube channel for interested parties out there that may have an interest in our proceedings. So before I proceed with this, may I first establish if we have a quorum and if there are members present on the platform. Will you please introduce yourself, and then we will take it from there.
Good morning, Chairperson. My name is Andrikus van der Westhuizen, and I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair. My name is Matlodi Maseko, and I'm the member of the Standing Committee.
Thank you.
Morning, Chair. Name is Pat Moran. I'm an alternate member of this committee.
Thank you, colleagues, for the introductions. We have received one apology, and that from the Minister, Anton Brudel, due to other pressing commitments. Johan, are there any other apologies that I have not received?
No, Chairperson, I haven't received any other apologies.
Okay. At this stage, colleagues and guests and members in particular, we are very conversant with the rules of engagement for our virtual meetings, and I shall not repeat all of it, but safe to say that guests on our MSC platforms, except those presenting into the meeting agenda, are not allowed to interact or participate verbally without being requested to do so by the chairperson. We have on the platform, we have technical assistance from our IT staff for members who may experience technical difficulties during the course of our meetings. All members and guests are muted at the beginning of our meeting to avoid any background noises. Please, as far as possible, we should try to eliminate any possible interference in the reception of your sort of input and your participation in the meeting. Unfortunately, colleagues, we do not have translation services available on the platform, so therefore the language of engagement shall be English, and wherever there is a pressing need for you to express yourself in a language that is other than English, we will make every effort to ensure that we solicit the required translation if need be from our side. We have the department here led by the the head of department by Mr. Graham Paulser, and we also have Ms. Ida Barnard, who is the Chief Director, Municipal Performance Monitoring and Support Services, as well as we have Professor Ajam, who is going to participate in the presentation. A warm welcome to the departmental officials and to Professor Ajam, and we hope that whatever you're going to share with us will be educative to us and inform the committee and its members in more detail as to from the department side and the collaboration with the foundation and the university as to what matters arose out of your research in terms of how we can ensure that our municipalities become more financially sustainable so that they could deliver better services to the residents that they serve. And without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to the department, and we will immediately proceed with the presentation and take it from there. Jan, in terms of the flighting of the presentation, how are you going to do it? So, colleagues, Mr. Paulser, are you on the platform, or is it Ms. Barnard that's here?
Yeah. Good morning, Honourable Chairperson. I am.
Good morning, Mr. Paulser.
Good morning to honourable members and the chairperson, as well as Professor Jam on the platform and Marlene Barnett from the Cyril Institute. So perhaps just by way of introduction, chairperson, if I may, and I think this research that has been undertaken, this project is one of many. And I just want to highlight perhaps one or two that we've done and how we've sequenced it. So I think on an annual basis, we also do an assessment, and it relates to the financial sustainability of municipalities. We collaborate obviously with the Provincial Treasury around this, but just the ongoing challenges in relation to financial sustainability in municipalities. So on an annual basis, we also do an assessment, comparative analysis on the rates and service charges that municipalities charge. And then just based on that, you can see that just based on the assessment of the rates, comparative analysis, that some of the smaller municipalities are struggling, and based to augment their revenue, are actually charging sort of higher tariffs in terms of the rates and service charges. So that's the one thing that we do. And the second thing that we've also done is to look at the basket of services, to look at the affordability of services, firstly from a consumer perspective, but also the affordability from a municipal perspective, whether municipalities can afford to provide a certain level of services, and whether the citizens then can afford to pay for that, and in the event that they can actually get a higher level of service from municipalities, where they are able to pay that higher level of services to the municipality. So that was the subsequent thing that we've done. And then obviously this particular project to look at the financial sustainability. You are aware with the onset of the COVID-19, we, myself and the Minister, had significant engagements, IGR engagements with municipalities. And those platforms raised concerns around the impact of COVID-19 on the financial sustainability, on the operations of the municipalities. And I mean, in conversations like those, they've raised questions like, can't myself and the Minister maybe speak to Eskom to see to what extent Eskom can maybe just give some kind of rebate, whether those are on the interest or on the amounts that they owe Eskom. They've asked us to speak to SALGA, where SALGA, obviously the annual membership fees and so on. Can SALGA perhaps give some kind of rebate on it, given the financial stress as a result of COVID-19? They've asked, listen, speak to the AG, whether you can maybe just speak to the agencies. Is there some kind of rebate in terms of the audit costs that municipalities need to pay, given the financial dilemma that municipalities are finding themselves in? And so they've asked us to actually engage with a number of their creditors to say, how do we assist? And obviously through the collaboration of ourselves, Hans Seidel, and obviously the University of Stellenbosch, particularly the School of Public Leadership, we have collaborated in this manner and asked and undertaken research around just to look at the financial sustainability. And the second aspect of that is to look at what are the COVID-19 implications on the operations from a financial perspective of municipalities. The research has been made known. The final report has been published, and we have shared that with all in the province. It's also our intention to look at maybe to share this on the national platform at the National MINMEC or a technical MINMEC. But obviously the participants have also asked that we, and I think Professor Jam is going to take the leadership on it, to write some academic paper around it and to share the knowledge that has been gained through this research in the province. So, Chairperson, that we have asked Professor Jam maybe to present the findings and the recommendations. And we want to actually consolidate this work and see how we assist municipalities further with the financial implications of COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Paulser, for that introduction. And I think that perhaps we should then proceed with the presentation and acquaint ourselves with the content of the research. Right, so, Johanna, are you going to, or is Professor Jam going to?
Can I, sorry to interrupt, Chair, but I'd prefer to flag my own presentation because
No, it's all good.
Quite quickly. Okay, great. Let me then just share my screen.
Welcome, Professor Jam.
Can somebody just tell me if they can see my screen?
It's visible, but yeah, that's all good now. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So just to say that our colleagues from Hans Seidel are very pleased that our research is being used in evidence-based oversight. With no further ado, I'm going to get to the content. So what we'll be discussing today is to look at what is the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on a sample of Western Cape municipalities, and then also look at the medium to longer term factors that will impact on the recovery, resilience and stabilization of Western Cape municipalities. As I said before, we did this in partnership with Hans Seidel Foundation. Marlene Barnard, the project manager, is here. We looked at 8 local municipalities. You can see them there, 3 district municipalities, a metro, and we concentrated on the first 3 quarters of the pandemic, from April 2020 to December 2020, because those were the only reports that were available at the time we did the research. So, I don't need to go over the definition of fiscal sustainability for this committee. As we are all well aware, it's the ability of the municipality to meet its mandates and its service delivery objectives while it maintains its current spending and revenue policies in its MTREF. This research looks primarily at short-term impact. As we all know, this pandemic is uncertain, and the longer it drags on, the more uncertain its impact on financial sustainability is going to be. It's also important to note that different municipalities have different contexts, so it's difficult to make generalizations across the board, but we will try and pick out trends which seem to have emerged. And then to also note that no matter how hard a municipality pushes LED, local economic development, at the end of the day, it's national economic policies which are really imperative, fiscal, monetary, etc. And when we recover, it's important not only to increase the rate of our growth, but also the nature of our growth path to make it more inclusive, green, and digital friendly. When we look at the research, my colleagues at SPL were quite astounded by the remarkable resilience in the short term in Western Cape local and district municipalities. We thought that it would be that the impact would have been much harder than what actually transpired. But having said this, there are medium and long-term sustainability threats, which I will also go through towards the end of this presentation. And what was quite important is that the conditions that prevailed before the pandemic had a major role in determining what happened during the pandemic. So where there was financial and governance instability, for example, in Kanaland, that became worse during the pandemic. But where there were systems in place, governance systems, a stable political administrative interface between the executive and the administration, then there was much greater resilience. And interestingly enough, the experience that municipalities had gone through with the drought and in preparation for climate change, traffic congestion, etc., also yield lessons which contributed towards resilience during the pandemic, which was quite an interesting finding. So besides desktop research, we also did 2 rounds of interviews, and then we isolated themes, and we did another round of interviews to focus on those themes. But one of the questions we asked was, what makes your municipality sustainable in spite of all the sustainability challenge just revealed so far? And it was interesting that the municipalities which were more resilient highlighted engagement in long-term financial planning, sophisticated data collection and financial modeling, trying to identify the right capital investments, continuously improving service delivery and reducing waste, and trying to adapt to circumstances. Also critical was a mature council and the political executive and their working relationship. So those governance factors are key predictor of financial sustainability. Where those are not in place, it's unlikely that the municipality will continue to be sustainable. And then finally, an uncompromising attitude towards good financial governance and against financial misconduct. So when we look at our local municipalities, as I said before, one of the big themes is that they have been a lot more resilient under the circumstances than what we would have expected. And there are 2 categories of reasons for that. The first is proactive strategies taken by the municipalities' management teams themselves. So they were able to adapt to working from home quite efficiently. They opened revenue offices early so that they could receive payments. And even before the pandemic, many of them were engaged in revenue enhancement strategies. So they had already been cleansing the customer database, getting cell phone numbers so that they could indulge in e-billing. For instance, prepaid meters were already being installed, and there were changes to tariff structures which included flat rate connection fees, which was also beneficial during the pandemic itself. And many of them were already implementing cost containment measures, and those were intensified. So that was the one set of factors which contributed to that, towards that resilience. But what we also see is that the size and the diversity of the revenue base of the municipality is also important. So when we look at the figures, we'll see that larger municipalities have more buoyant and diversified rates and service user charges basis, and they fared much better than the smaller counterparts. For example, Stellenbosch, when we see the numbers, did much better than Laingsburg, for instance, as a smaller municipality. And the composition of the local economy was critical. So there was more reliance on the tourism sector, which was harder hit by lockdown. We see the economy being harder hit than those municipalities that were agriculture based, especially after the drought had broken. As I said before, if there were systems and governance challenges before the pandemic, they were amplified during the pandemic. And when you ask what is the operational impact of the pandemic, its hardest hit was the capital budget. So municipalities in the Western Cape are one of the few municipalities around the country that actually access capital markets and borrow. And when the pandemic hit, they adopted a lot more conservative borrowing strategies and borrowed less and relied more on internal funds. And as a result, you see quite large costs in capital budgets and deferring of capital expenditures, which will impact service delivery down the line. Just to look at how quickly municipalities bounce back, this table shows GDPR, regional GDP, which is the proxy for economic growth in the municipality. And the first two columns in that green block show historical growth, basically before the pandemic. The third column, 2020, shows how the pandemic hit, and then a projected growth for 2021. So these come from the excellent Western Cape Meadow publication. And I just want to draw your attention to, if you look at a municipality like Stellenbosch, you'll see that even before the pandemic, growth was sluggish. 1.4% average between 2014 and 2018, and only just above 0% in 2019. But if you look at the bounce back after the pandemic, that is actually projected quite well at 7.6% and 4.3%. Whereas if you look at a small municipality like Laingsburg, you'll see that their growth was also small before the pandemic, even contracting by 1.2% in 2019. And they were very hard hit. A much slower recovery, only 1.8% projected in 2020 and 0.8% in 2021. So that will obviously influence the state of the cash flows going forward. Interestingly enough, rates and user charges were not as strongly undermined as they could have been. But smaller revenue sources such as fines, penalties, license, rental of municipal properties, etc., were very hard hit and in some cases reduced to zero. And so what we find is that long-term sustainability factors are more important than COVID rather than the pandemic-related short-term factors in determining the sustainability of municipalities in the Western Cape. And these longer-term factors include increases in employment costs, bulk service costs, local government equitable share grants not keeping pace, and erosion of electricity surpluses due to NERSA decisions, etc. And so the most significant expenditure factors are largely driven by these systemic factors, not a pandemic cost per se, even though there were increase in costs of PPE and sanitizer, etc., etc. But at the same time, municipalities also saw savings in travel and subsistence costs, which helped to some extent to offset that. Cost containment strategies have been stringently applied. And there's very little fat in most Western Cape municipalities. The only budget that can still be cut is actually the personnel budget in some cases. Free basic service cost and subsidized revenue cost over the MTF is projected to grow below the growth rate of the equitable share. So in other words, municipalities' free basic costs are not going to be unaffordable in relation to the equitable share. But there's been quite an increase in reporting compliance during the pandemic, which has created an administrative burden for municipalities. At the same time, municipalities were also adapting to MSCOA, which was also a challenge to them, and many municipalities, the lower capacity municipalities, perceived that there was insufficient support from provincial and national treasury and other provincial departments. Just want to quickly just give you a look at the quarterly operating revenue of municipalities in the first quarter. So if you look at this column here, the fourth column from the right, it says 1920 quarter 3. That is the start of the pandemic in April last year. And you can see that revenue basically takes a knock of 5% less as a percentage of the deficit. Sorry, we are running a deficit of 5% as a percentage of operating revenue, but then Stellenbosch actually goes into surplus for the next 3 quarters of the municipality, which of the pandemic, which is quite surprising, right? But if we look at a smaller municipality like Esekwa, you'll see that in the quarter that the pandemic struck, there was a 10% operating surplus, and then we see an operating surplus of 54% in the next quarter after that, a slight recovery towards a surplus from a deficit, and then it's swung into a deficit again, deficit of 19%. So the point that I'm trying to make is that the operating budgets of smaller municipalities were hit much harder than their larger counterparts. Here is Laingsburg. You can see that Laingsburg also had a 28% deficit first quarter of the pandemic, 34% deficit second quarter of the pandemic, improving to a slight surplus and then a smaller deficit, but still much harder struck than the bigger municipalities. When we look at year-on-year changes in revenue, we see that despite the pandemic, even in the first quarter of the pandemic, Stellenbosch still had an 11% year-on-year increase in revenue compared to that same quarter a year previously. And while the revenue declined, it wasn't as much as what we could have expected. And the same applies really to Swartland. But when we look at Laingsburg, we can see that while initially our revenues increased in the first 2 quarters of the pandemic, as employment consequences, etc., worked through, we see more unemployment, layoffs, etc., and we see that feeding into revenues with a 22% deficit in the third quarter of the pandemic ending December. So to just go on from local municipalities to district municipalities, and to note that district municipalities were hit much harder than local municipalities. Their liquidity and solvency was impaired by the pandemic, but it's still satisfactory because they had internal reserves which could be run down, and interest income, etc., from the past. Especially district municipalities had to play a social development role, which is not their mandate, but they are nearest to the people. They are highly dependent on the REC replacement grant, especially those district municipalities without property portfolios. West Coast Water Concession places it in a slightly more favorable position than the other 2 district municipalities. And where these district municipalities were hardest hit was in terms of capital budgets. Now, they don't deliver services, so it's not service infrastructure that's being hit, but the other office space, maintenance, etc., all fell well below the norm for maintenance spending. There was also significant short-term pressures from cost of employment budgets, as well as reductions in grants and national minimum standards, which the municipalities feel are not affordable. Many district municipalities get money from doing agency functions in terms of the roads, which was initially disrupted by the pandemic. But afterwards, district municipalities were able to proceed, and we see that revenue stream coming online again. What is concerning is that when you look at agency agreements in the Western Cape, they appear to be negotiated on a rather ad hoc basis rather than a 3-year basis, which doesn't create funding certainty for municipalities over the MTREF, but do create pressures for expansions of the road functions employment. So the committee could look at a much more medium-term and formalized setup for the agency agreement. Because municipalities don't borrow to finance infrastructure, gearing is not that much of an issue for them. Just to quickly look at the numbers, if you look at Cape Winelands municipality, you can see that prior to the pandemic, there was a 15% operating surplus. Pandemic struck, went into a 75% deficit, but then it moved on into surplus again. And we see the same pattern from Central Karoo. So for a district municipality to get those surpluses, they can't really increase their revenues, which meant that they must have been cutting their cost basically to the bone. I just want to close off by moving on to the long-term sustainability factors. I made the point that the municipalities have responded remarkably resiliently to the pandemic, but they are under threat from long-term sustainability factors. As I mentioned before, municipalities will have to make hard decisions on cost of employment, prioritization of the capital program, trying to make sure that there's a good mix of projects that generate revenue so that you can at least fund maintenance, etc., from purely social projects. Also, tariff setting. Tariffs are going to have to go up in future in order to get the internal savings so that it can finance capital expenditure, given that borrowing is actually so unfavorable. And at the same time, municipalities are facing partially funded mandates and the financial impacts of court decisions on land location, etc., etc. So to just note that for the first time, we see the local government fiscal framework has become unstable, reducing certainty and predictability for municipalities. And this also includes regulatory decisions in respect of water and electricity. And before, since 1994, since I've been monitoring the situation, always the local government equitable share and the provincial equitable share were protected. Now it's not necessarily the case, as state-owned entities have demand more and more money, more and more bailouts. The fiscal framework has become more and more uncertain. The local government functional framework has remained unresolved for more than a decade. For example, the role of district municipalities. And we've seen incremental shifts in functions on a sector-by-sector basis without looking at what the impact on the sphere as a whole is. Currently, the assumptions which underpin the 1998 White Paper on Local Government no longer hold. At that time, bulk electricity prices were high and there was a lot of room for cross-subsidization. Now that's no longer possible and we have load shedding as well. Water patterns, consumption patterns is changing because of drought and climate change. And new technologies mean that we can move to more decentralized approaches, renewable energy, microgrids, and associated electricity reforms. All of this taken together means that the local government fiscal framework that we have is currently not going to be fit for purpose moving forward. And so what there needs to be is not a kind of a routine review of the local government fiscal framework where there's just incremental changes. What we really need to do is to interrogate the underlying assumptions of the local government fiscal framework and have a change management strategy. That is a national function and not a provincial function. But I think that to the extent the Western Cape can advocate for that, the better. Now, my second last slide, I just want to look at the impact on indigent households of the pandemic. So we would expect that the number of indigent households would increase because people are more poor. But when we look at the latest non-financial census of municipalities, what we see is that in most provinces, the number of indigent registrations is decreasing. Okay, in other words, municipalities are not registering indigent households because they need to save money, right? So if you look at the graph, you'll see that there are these orange bars. The orange bars show the percentage of indigent or poor households or adults living in poverty in the province. So if you look at Western Cape, we have 32.2% of our adults live in poverty. right? If you look at the blue bar, which is the percentage of households registered as indigent, you can see that 18%, or make it 19% of our households are registered as indigent. So if you look at the gap between the orange bar and the blue bar, that shows it's a rough indicator of indigent households uncovered. So it's clear that Western Cape still has a lot more work to do. But if you look at other provinces, we are actually faring much better. So if you compare us to Gauteng province, you can see that Gauteng has got a lower number of adults living in poverty. Theirs is only 29% compared to our 32%, but they only have 6.4% of indigent households registered, whereas we at least have 18.9%. If you compare us to municipalities like provinces like Limpopo, for instance, you can see that the roughly 2/3 of adults in Limpopo are living in poverty, but only 18.4% of households are registered as indigent, which is almost the same as our percentage, but we have much lower incidence of poverty in our province. So we've got a lot of work still to do, but we are faring better than other provinces, which is not saying much. Okay, that draws my presentation to a close. I'm going to unshare my screen and we can take questions from then on.
Thank you so much, Professor Jam, for this insightful presentation that, it's also very disturbing in many respects. So I'm going to open the floor for inputs from members, and then we will respond to whatever questions may come from our members. So you have an opportunity to comment on the presentation and to ask questions for clarity and whatever else you may think may be necessary. Welcome, Honourable Maria. I see you also on the platform. You seem to become a regular guest on our at our meetings, so it's most welcome. So in this order, I will recognize Honourable van der Westhuizen, Honourable Maseko, and then Honourable Marais, and then lastly Honourable Moran. So we will take it in that order, and then we will give Professor Jam an opportunity to respond to your remarks and questions. Honourable van der Westhuizen, I hand the floor to you. You may give your input.
Good, thank you, Chairperson, and my apologies for any background noise that you may be picking up. I am competing with my garden services here today. Chair, thank you firstly for the presentation to Professor Jam. I found some of those figures really fascinating. Can I just first ask, and unfortunately I couldn't get all the slide numbers, but if she could go to that one slide, it's a table where it shows that Stellenbosch municipality seems to have a far better recovery in income than, for example, its neighboring Drakensberg municipality. And I would like to know if Professor Jam and the team went into the reasons for this, because I think we need to understand quite closely. In my book, both these are semi-rural municipalities. Both of them have got, in general, fast-growing economies. Both of them are financially stable municipalities, and yet there have been these vast differences in their response during COVID. And I think it will help us a lot if we could understand what the reasons behind those differences are. My second question is just, it is my impression that municipal revenue streams are not a linear graph or line throughout the financial year of municipalities, because quite a significant number of households or property owners do pay their property rates on an annual basis. Perhaps if Professor Ajam could just help us to explain to what extent did she take into account the vast differences in the revenue flow throughout the financial year of municipalities. And then lastly, Chair, from our side, on slide 17, the very last one that Professor presented to us, which I find a very interesting one. On the one hand, it seems to me as if the Western Cape outperformed the other provinces in extending a helping hand to indigent residents, in the sense that, you know, we help a significantly higher percentage of our poor households than in any other province of South Africa. But that, you know, I'm concerned about what we're comparing. We're comparing the percentage of households that I presume are receiving municipal accounts on a monthly basis to the percentage of adults that are living in poverty. And I'm just asking myself, would we eventually be able to get 100% correlation between these two figures? Are we comparing apples with apples, or is it the sense that apples and pears may be, you know, slightly different, and that no province will ever be able to really, you know, help the same percentage of let's call it people receiving municipal accounts than that of the population living in abject poverty? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Could I recognize Honourable Maseko?
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, thanks, Professor, for the well-informed research and the info that we really appreciate. Just one question, and I'm going to add to Member Andrika's on the slide that was doing a comparison of the percentage of the households registered as indigent and the proportion of total provincial household. Is there a reason why the department is using the finding of the living conditions survey of 2014-2015 and versus the registrations of the indigent household of 2019? And how do you align that to the unemployment statistics? Does it contribute to the unemployment statistics that has come out recently, or there is a specific reason maybe that I can understand why 2014-15 and not any other year that is close by, maybe your 2019-2018 or your 2017-2016, to check the alignment? And again, is there an indication maybe when you were finding out that the municipalities have the, I cannot say capacity, I don't know what word to use, to really do the awareness of registering for the indigent grant, to make sure that they've got those numbers in order, or the statistics in order, to know what is happening within their municipalities? To what an extent is the municipality poverty stricken by the COVID-19, or there's no appetite for that due to the struggles that the municipalities are facing due to the loss of their revenue generation as the pandemic is hitting most of our municipalities also? Thank you, Chair. I think that's all from me.
Thank you, Honourable Maseko. Honourable Murray.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I'm becoming quite a regular here, but I'm glad I'm still welcome. I'd like to ask the following questions. Did you, in your research, Professor, also find out what effect the criteria for municipal demarcation have on the viability of the municipalities, especially those in the rural areas? Do you think there need to be redemarcation along other criteria based on what your research brought up? Number two, did you in your research compare the efficacy of the now disbanded divisional councils of old compared to the current district councils? Are district councils not just a pooling of poor municipalities? The poor can't resolve the problems of the poor. You need the rich to help the poor, not the poor help themselves. 3, would the reintroduction of the regional service council levies, which used to be on businesses to help municipalities, in your view have improved fiscal instability, as you so well pointed out, the fiscal instability at local level? And finally, rapid urbanization, which of course, as you should know and we all know, is an unstoppable force. You can't stop urbanization. Would you say that it's a failure to prepare for rapid urbanization by cities? Or is it a failure to develop new growth points in the rural areas to stop the rapid urbanization? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Murray, for those questions. And lastly, for this round, Honourable Murray, and then give Professor Jam an opportunity to respond to the questions and comments. Honourable Moran, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chair, and mornings to everyone present. Chair, and I think the Honourable Van der Westhuizen and basically also alluded to these particular issues of Stellenbosch compared to Drakenstein, because what we have heard through this presentation is the comparison of...
Tula.
Member Makamba Boja, mute.
Yeah, is the comparison between Kannaland or Laingsburg, which is much smaller municipalities, versus Stellenbosch. And I was also thinking, why then having that comparison between these two municipalities? And my first question, Chairperson, I would like to know whether the drought over the last 6-7 years in your Laingsburg area, Karoo, Kannaland, whether it had an impact on the income streams or the performance of those municipalities. We know, for instance, Stellenbosch, very healthy, no drought over the last 100 years. So my first question is whether the drought was also taken into consideration. The second one, Chair, is with the introduction, Mr. Paulse raised the issue, for instance, of your financial stability and higher rates for municipalities. Was there a study done how these higher rates impact on your communities and whether it's sustainable, Chair, to make sure that on the one side there's higher rates, but on the other side, people on the other side survive and they continue paying their rates? We know, for instance, COVID and the impact of COVID. Many people out of jobs and so forth. Whether this study, whether there's a study been done to see, for instance, the impact of these higher rates for municipalities, whether it's sustainable and people can continue keeping up with their rates. Lastly, it's interesting, I haven't heard the presenter not once speaking about the Cape Town Metro and the many complaints that we are receiving from people on the Cape Flats, and how higher rates, the water tariffs over the last 2-3 years, water levy that's been implemented not so long, the ESCOM, how those impact on those poor communities. I haven't heard once that there was the city of Cape Town Metro mentioned in this presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Moran. I think I'm going to pause there for a first round response, and then I will open up the floor for a second round of questions. Professor Jam, if you could possibly, respond to those inputs, and will be much appreciated, and we will take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I just want to share a one slide. I just want to go back to one of the slides. Can you tell me if you can see my slide?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. So I want to address the question from Honourable van der Westhuizen on the difference between Drakenstein and Stellenbosch, and I want to point out that part of the reason is external. Okay, so here it shows Stellenbosch's growth rate in the year of the pandemic, 7.6%, and then it goes to 4.3%. Whereas if you look at Drakenstein, they have a much sharper contraction during the pandemic, and only a much slower recovery in this year as well. Right. So part of the reason for the outcomes that you're seeing in terms of revenue has got to do with external factors due to the different compositions of those two economies, and we unpack that in the report. But the other reason is also difference in leverage. So if you look at Drakenstein, they had invested quite a lot in infrastructure to preempt economic growth, which didn't then happen because of the pandemic. So it wasn't like it was a wrong decision. It was just a decision that didn't have perfect foresight. So obviously, if you look at Drakenstein, they have a lot more interest payments to serve, which then contributes to the operating deficit. So there are also internal reasons for that as well. We do go through it in more detail in the report itself. Then the second issue on seasonality, that it differs, revenue payments differ across the year, absolutely true. And that's for that reason we looked at year-on-year growth rates. So we looked at first quarter relative to first quarter last year, fourth quarter relative to fourth quarter last year, because we know that in the fourth quarter, for instance, we tend to see property rates payments increase. So when you look at year on year, you kind of control for that seasonality. And then a question was raised about, to what extent can you get 100% correlation between the the percentage of poor adults and households receiving indigent subsidies. I think that it's absolutely correct. You're never going to get 100%. It's a very rough indicator, but the orders of magnitude are so large that no matter how you tweak the statistics, the fact that you are actually seeing that there isn't, the coverage is not good. And if you look at over time, it's actually decreasing. That is the main message that I want to bring across, because national government is considering creating new entitlements like basic income grants, etc., when they are actually not funding entitlements like basic services. And there was a recent paper by PARI, the Public Affairs Research Institute at Wits University, that pointed to the same result. So I think that I take on board everything said about the indicators. They're rough, but my answer is the final result will still remain because of the orders of magnitude that we're talking about. Then moving on to Honourable Maseko, I think you're absolutely right. You could look at more updated data, but it's going to tell you the same story. So what I'm showing you probably underestimates the gap that we're talking about. So the Honourable Member also raised the issue of increased unemployment rates. Now, obviously, that would not be factored into the data on poverty that I'm showing you. That data would have actually worsened. So, whatever I'm showing you, that gap is actually bigger in real life, than what it's shown up there. I think that the honourable member also raised the important point about, do municipalities have an understanding of what is going on in their communities, or are they actually overwhelmed? I think that it's not that municipalities don't want to do more. I think that they are under such severe cost containment measures that there's actually very little that they can do. As I said before, they're really being cut to the bone. Then moving on to the issue of Honourable Marais, which relate to the effects of municipal demarcation. And then also, did we compare the old divisional council with the current district councils? That fell outside the scope of the study. Okay, I think it's an important study to do, but the methodology would be completely different. What I do know is that a study has been done in this regard by the Financial and Fiscal Commission. And what they found is that when municipalities merge or get consolidated, then service delivery stops for 3 years. Right. So the point that I want to make is that even if there is in principle an argument for going this route, be very careful about how you do it, because it actually paralyzes the municipality. So can we afford to have nothing happening for 3 years? Then the point of the Regional Services Council raised by the Honourable Marais, I think it's important to note that the Regional Services Council levy was unconstitutional. Right, so it would need to be reformulated. But I absolutely agree with him that municipalities, especially district municipalities, they need to have an own revenue source, which is under their own control, and not just rely on grants from national government that can be arbitrarily cut anytime. And especially with the fiscal framework becoming very unstable, that risk is actually amplifying. And then he asked the question, is urbanization failure to plan on behalf of cities, or is it failure to create economic opportunities in rural areas? I would say both, right? Without a doubt, both. We knew urbanization was coming, but we actually wasted this last decade doing very little, right? You know, at national level, to think about how we plan for this urbanization. And things like smart cities, copying China, that's not going to work for us. You know, I think we need to do a lot more research on that. Then Honourable Maran raised the issue of Kannaland versus Laingsburg, right? I think it's also important to, you know, if I look at the slide that I'm showing now, if you look at Kannaland and Laingsburg, you see that even in 2019, there was a negative 1% growth in Kannaland, negative 2% growth in Laingsburg. That is basically the impact of your drought, right? And then if you go forward, you'll see that the rebound in Kannaland is actually worse than the rebound in Laingsburg. So some of the differences between the outcomes of these two municipalities have really got to do with the local economy of those municipalities, not the municipalities themselves. But then there's also another issue, which is how the management team responds. So there's also an element of the Laingsburg team responding much better and more resiliently than Kannaland. And we all know what's going on, Kannaland and the administrator and all that court case and whatever happened, right? Okay, so there's also, we see a confluence of bad local economic development factors and you know, less effective internal managerial responses. Then the issue raised by Honourable Maran on the affordability of higher rates. Unfortunately, we only had, I think it was 4 months to do this study. So we didn't look at affordability because that would require going to communities and actually doing a survey, which, you know, we didn't have the resources or the time to do. But I think it's important to look at that. What is relevant is that these increases that we're talking about, they came in mainly as a result of the drought, as far as water is concerned, for instance. So it wasn't as if there were increases in responses to the pandemic. It's just that those weren't dropped. The rates weren't dropped. But given the inequality in the city of Cape Town, there would be massive impacts across different areas. In the city, and formal and informal settlements. So that is certainly worthy of study. In terms of the city of Cape Town itself, we did cover it in the report, but we were told to stick to 20 minutes. So, we didn't want to introduce other slides, but if anybody's interested, please go and have a look at the main report. I think that covered all the questions that I have so far.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Jam. I don't know if there's direct follow-up questions members would like to ask. I see 2 hands. I'm not sure whether those are new hands or whether they are legacy hands.
Mine is a new one, sir.
Okay, Honourable Marais, you may pose your follow-up question.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to ask the Professor, what are your views on the success of metros? We talk about this big city metros. Are they really necessary? And are they more efficient than a municipality? Is that bringing government closer to the people or taking it away from the people? Metros. The whole idea of a metro, what is your views on metros, or are we just copying what happens overseas? Is it suitable for South Africa? And how successful do you think metros are compared to standalone municipalities?
Thank you, Honourable Marais. Professor Jam, I don't know if you wish to respond to that.
Yes, I think that we need to separate out the democratic impact of metros from the economic impact. And I want to agree with Honourable Marais that from a democratic point of view, they are further from the people, right? From an economic point of view, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that a metro is more efficient, right? Because you can do capital projects, light rail, you can make use of the urban densities. And if you look at the city of Cape Town, there was a study, 2 studies, one done by the South African Cities Network and one done by the Financial and Fiscal Commission on performance of municipalities. And both show that city of Cape Town as a metro is actually quite efficient, in terms of the water losses, electricity, technical losses, etc. Some of the lowest in the world. So I'm not saying that all metros are efficient, but from an economic perspective, the economies of scale that metros have. And if we consider that we're moving into the digital age, things like providing free Wi-Fi, which I think we actually need to do to stimulate economic growth in this province, that can be much easier and done much more cheaper at metro level. That's my comment.
Thank you, Professor. Honourable Marais, I see your hand again, but I don't know if it is a new question you'd like to ask.
I am at your mercy, sir. If you say no, I've had enough questions, I'll lower my hand.
No, for sure, if you wish to respond, I will grant you the opportunity. You are most welcome to pose your questions. That's why we are here, to seek clarity and be informed.
Okay. Professor, there's nothing wrong with your reply, and I know that I've anticipated that would be your reply, the economic aspect of it. Now let's unpack the economic aspect of it. That municipality is a money horse because it has most of the rate basis in the Western Cape is in is in the metro. Yeah, how do they distribute it? Does the other surrounding municipalities benefit by it? And can they not help adjacent municipalities, which just happens, unfortunately, to fall outside their economic base. Must they struggle to survive because of fiscal policies at national level? Or does the metro have a responsibility because the people outside the metro do all the shopping in the metro, and the metro's big money base and capital income comes from surrounding people who come to the city and spend all their money here? So what do they get in return?
Thank you, Honourable Marie. I just need to come in here now. It's a relevant question to ask, Honourable Marie, but I, respectfully do not want to put Professor Jam, in a position where she has to provide an opinion with regard to the questions that you pose. I think that is something to consider, perhaps for further research. I'm not too sure, but I think perhaps it is worth noting the remark. But I'd like to make a remark and possibly ask a question or two with regard to the research that was presented. And that being one, at the start of the research, at the start of the presentation, it was stated that there's a correlation between good governance, stable administration, political stability within and financial sustainability of abilities. In the 2020 audit outcomes have also stated quite categorically that relationship between good governance, stable administration, political stability, and clean audit outcomes or unqualified audit outcomes. And she was particularly flattering about the Western Cape Department of Local Government, as well as the Treasury, in terms of the support that it provides to municipalities in the Western Cape in ensuring that there is that sort of outcome that will ensure that financial resources are being applied frugally and prudently and correctly, I suppose. So I need to highlight that, and I think that the research, albeit in a very short period of time, and it is well done, has once again emphasized that direct link. So my one first question I'd like to ask, in terms of there's a chart that you presented in terms of the relationship between the indigent households and within the province and those registered in the province, is that with the reduction in equitable share to municipalities countrywide, and we in the Western Cape is no exception, we've discovered that perhaps due to the reduction of indigent reduction equitable share, there is a direct relationship between the registration of indigent households for financial relief. So the less we have, the less financial sort of layout we need to effect. But that the equitable share is also linked to the percentage of indigent citizens within a particular municipality. So the higher, the greater the proportion of indigent allocation of equitable allocation will be given to that particular municipality, and therefore, if we don't reach an equal amount of indigent household, then certainly we will benefit and use that extra financial resources for other operating expenses. It's on the one hand. And secondly, have you, in your research, perhaps encounter in the municipalities that came under scrutiny, is there a relationship between maladministration and the staff vacancies in rather critical portfolios, such as within technical sort of directorates that is largely responsible for creating infrastructure and maintaining infrastructure for service delivery, that in terms of financial stability, where those municipalities, where those sort of vacancies exist, services are not delivered to such an extent that is required, that would motivate people to pay for the services. And then lastly, in terms of the chains of employment, and the slide that you had on the screen in your response to some of the questions, take us as far as 2019, and I'm very aware that for us to produce outcomes in terms of our research, we cannot have the very latest statistics and information available to incorporate in a presentation like this. But in your view, is the continued state of disaster, the lifting of the lockdown and easing of lockdown restrictions to a large extent, would that contribute to an improvement in employment of residents within our province and in the country, and thereby also enable them to pay for services? And once people start paying for services because they have a job, then certainly, our municipalities will become financially a bit more stable. For that, for now, Professor, I don't know. If you have any other questions you'd like to pose, you may do so before Professor Ajama respond to those questions. Welcome, Honorable Makamba Boycha. I recognize you. You may ask a question.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thanks to the meeting. I just want to find out, Chairperson, if the following municipalities have got enough resources to participate in the Municipal Energy Resilience Project that was introduced by the Provincial Department of Local Government and Treasury last year. The first municipality being Drakenstein, Mossel Bay, Overstrand, Saldanha, Stellenbosch, and Swartland. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Makamba Boycha. Honorable Maria, I hope that what you state in the chat is in jest. I don't know what you mean by that. Be it as it may. I'm going to hand over to Honorable Professor Ajam just respond, and then I will have a final round of questions or comments from members.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. First, talking about your question on the indigent households, and if I understood correctly, you were asking, is there a link between the reduction in the local government equitable share and a slowness in registering indigent households? I would say absolutely, but not just the equitable share. It's all factors that create financial pressures. So it's the local government equitable share reductions plus increases in the wage bill, plus increase in bulk service costs. So those taken collectively create the environment where municipalities have got very little incentive to actually expand the indigent base. And even if they have an incentive and they want to do it, the ability to do it is compromised. And I think that in the Western Cape, it's more the ability rather than the incentive per se. You raised the issue of staff vacancies and maladministration. I think that when you look at functions like supply chain management, for instance, the minute you have vacancies, you compromise the segregation of duties and your internal controls, right? And I think the same also applies to, when you don't have proper town engineers, etc. So I think that especially rural municipalities that we interviewed, said that they experienced massive problems in attracting suitably qualified personnel. And part of the reason is actually the regulated pay scales, because what the municipal managers told us is that before, people would be mid-management in City of Cape Town and they would become, for instance, a municipal manager in a rural area because it was a step up. Now it isn't. So why should they go to a rural area, take more responsibility when they can actually just stay where they are? So I think that especially rural areas face huge challenges in that respect. On the non-financial census going back to 2019, that is actually the latest one. And it was only released in 2021. And because of Stats SA's budget cuts, they actually are thinking of scrapping that census. I wrote to them and said, please don't, because how else are we going to have an official numbers? Now, there are other people that do estimates of numbers, but for me, it's always better to go with the official Stats SA because that is actually the most authoritative. Will the lockdown increase employment? I think if it's alleviated, it will definitely increase employment. We're lucky that we have seen an upswing in commodities, which is lifting our economy. Otherwise, it could be a lot worse. Advanced economies are recovering faster. So there is an opportunity that we can get back the tourism market, especially if we manage COVID well. And I think that everybody's learning how to do it. So definitely, I think the sooner we can do that safely, the sooner we can have everybody vaccinated, basically the better. And then Honourable Botia's question on the Municipal Energy Resilience Programme, I will ask the colleagues from the Local Government Department to answer that, because unfortunately that wasn't something that we looked at in our research.
Thank you, Professor Jam. I see that we have a follow-up question from Honourable Makamba Boita. I don't know if it is a legacy hand, Honourable Boita.
No, Chair, that's an old hand. It's an
old hand. Okay, thank you. Right, members, colleagues, any further final questions you'd like to ask before I, proceed to something else? Going once, going twice.
I would like to ask, sir.
Honourable Marie, you may.
You base your study and research on two things, and it all centers around what happens to COVID, and COVID will have this and that effect on whatever you present to us. Did your research, is it based on your assumption that COVID will stop soon? And what if COVID continues for the next 5 years? Would your research have meant anything at all? because most of the things in your figures you show here is if there's a relaxation in COVID, and everything, if it's bad, it's COVID. If it's good, it's COVID is not there anymore. But we don't know when COVID is going to stop, Professor. So what is the new figures? If COVID persists at levels of 2019, or if it doesn't? Did you take that in? I wouldn't like to get a rosy picture and we all think COVID is going to be over in another year's time or 2 months' time, and then we will have positive results. I think you must give us the worst, and then we can be really upbeat about a better position. Don't give us the best, better report, and then it turns out worse. What do you think?
Thank you, Honorable Maria. I'm going to give it over to Professor Ajam to she wishes to respond to that, and then I will take it from there.
Yeah, Honorable Marie, I think that you're right, but I want to point out that nobody knows what the duration of this pandemic is going to be, right? But if you look at the findings of our study, it's clear that the pandemic isn't the major threat to financial sustainability in the Western Cape. It's actually systemic issues of the local government fiscal framework. So I'd be more concerned, quite frankly, about your personnel costs, the local government equitable share, issues like bulk service costs, than the pandemic per se, right? I do think that when we look at vaccination, it's not going to be a magic bullet, but I think that we are going to learn to live with the virus. So in the study, we haven't speculated about how long the pandemic will continue. But what I do know is that as more and more people get vaccinated, right, the quicker we will actually get online. But that's not going to solve our problems because, as I pointed out, our problems are actually more deep structural, and a lot of those decisions and impacts depend on what they've done at national level.
Thank you, Professor Ajam. Just one more question that I'd like to ask, and then the department, Honorable Makamba Boycha, posed a question, and Professor Ajam, alluded to a response from the department. And I'm going to hand over to Mr. Paulson to respond to that. But just the last question I'd like to ask with regard to this particular research done by that was presented in terms of, and I know it was selected municipalities, and it was large municipalities and metro and smaller municipalities. To what extent could we extrapolate the outcomes of this research to those other municipalities that were not directly covered by the research, because they did not form part of the studies, but in terms of geography, in terms of economic sort of challenges faced by other municipalities, with the recommendations that will flow from this, could they also be sort of applied in our other municipalities in the Western Cape? And then Mr. Paulson then will respond or direct somebody to respond to Honorable Makamba Boycha's question. And if she wishes to repeat the question, if it is, it's gone lost in translation, she may wish to do so. Professor Ajam?
Honourable Chair, regarding the sample and whether we can generalize, my feeling is that we can actually generalize. I will ask the colleagues from Department of Local Government to come in here. We also went through a process where we presented our findings to the Municipal Managers Forum and to the MINMA as well. And I think that obviously the degree differs from municipality to municipality, but the general trends that we see, I think, hold for the period across the province. I've also engaged with the Financial and Fiscal Commission, who have done a similar study, but looking at the rest of the municipalities in the other provinces. And what I can say that the Western Cape has actually done remarkably well compared to those other provinces.
Thank you, Professor. Okay. Mr. Paulser, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. This is in relation to the question around the energy. So we are working together with the Department of Economic Development that is doing the work with us, and the green energy in relation to electricity in these municipalities. From our side, we're working with CDAF, with the French Development Agency, around just assisting municipalities with infrastructure development around infrastructure. And part of it is also to make those projects bankable, so that we can actually approach financial institutions for funding for those initiatives. As I say, we've done work around it. We can definitely come back with a response in relation to, is there adequate funding for this energy resilience in these municipalities? And perhaps, Chair, what I would suggest is that we perhaps schedule a briefing on the work done by ourselves and the Department of Economic Development in relation to the energy resilience of those municipalities that have indicated that they are ready. And with Green Cape, maybe make a presentation in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paulser. Honourable Makamba-Boita, if there's follow-up you'd like to ask, you may do so.
Chairperson, thank you. I think with regards to the last response, I think it's fair enough that we should have a designated meeting that will probably focus on them giving us an idea of how these municipalities will thrive on this particular project. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Makamba-Boita. And lastly, could I ask Marlene Barnard from Hans Seidel Foundation if she wished to make a remark or two? She's most welcome to do so.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting the Hans Seidel Foundation. This was very interesting to me. I have read the study, but the discussions really helped me to understand the problems even better. So I hope that I can attend more of these committee meetings in the future, because I think it helps especially people from outside to understand the whole local government sphere much better. And we are very glad that we could support this research, and I hope it goes a long way and helps to kind of tweak the right things in legislation, or also in practical terms, to make local government more efficient in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Barnard, for those remarks. And from our side, we'd like to express our extreme gratitude for the partnership that the Hans Seidel Foundation has with the Department of Local Government in making our municipalities more efficient, more effective, and also as a consequence thereof deliver better services to our citizens. And to Professor Ajam, thank you so much for the research, and I think that it reinforces the long-held view that we have that the municipalities in the Western Cape are not perfect. There are lots of shortcomings, and there are, in some instances, they are systemic. But in terms of our positioning within the broader South Africa, we are in a much better position due to the work that is being done by our partnerships with university, yourself, and the foundation, and our department, and our treasury, and all the mayors and councillors and hardworking municipal administrators out there who often are not spoken about, who often are not recognized for the tremendous sacrifices they make in delivering services to our people. And from our side, we will, on a periodic basis, as Ms. Barnett indicated, invite you to the committee to share your insights and your research and with the committee and its members, so that we could strengthen our relationship, but also to ensure that ultimately the winners are our people out there who deserve better services. Thank you so much. And Mr. Paulson, I don't know if there's any final remarks you'd like to make. I will provide you this opportunity, and thereafter you may exit the meeting, and the committee will then take care of its other administrative tasks that it needs to complete. Thank you, Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson, and thank you to Professor Jam as well as Marlena, and to all the honourable members on the platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was short and sweet. Thank you. Professor Jam, once again, thank you, and you and the officials, and Marlene, you may exit the meeting. We will then continue with the administration. Thank you, members, for your engagement and the questions you've posed in relation to the research. And I'm going to immediately ask for resolutions, seeing that whatever is being sort of shared with us are still fresh in our minds. So if there's any resolutions you'd like to take or propose, we may do so. And I think the first resolution is to get a copy of the report, seeing that the research has been completed. Honourable Padavesaisan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I concur. I think obviously in a presentation one could only get a précis or a summary of the report, and I think the full report would make not only for interesting reading but would inform us. The second one is, Chair, I'm not sure to what extent does the report refer to what Professor Jam referred to as systemic problems with our local governments. And I think if I may propose that we try to ask the department or other knowledgeable people to unpack for us the systemic reasons or issues why our local governments are in the position that they find themselves in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just a comment on that. If we have the report, then the report would sort of indicate to us the systemic problems that may exist. Shouldn't we rather wait until then, and perhaps based on the report, if we don't get that clarity, and then ask the department to unpack us the systemic problems that may exist, or shall we separate it to just a thought? Honourable Padavesaisan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if you say, let's just first see whether the report unpacks this sufficiently, and if not, let's then, look at the systemic issues. I'll go along with that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Honourable Maria, I recognise you. You had your hand raised.
Chair, yes, thank you. Chair, I think that is a very, very good suggestion by the Chair. The the issue with research is research is based on statistics, and statistics, you know, statistics is statistics, and my experiences are my experiences. So whatever you find in that report that doesn't cover the questions I posed, I came to this meeting because these are worrying issues. You can't gloss over it. We heard what she said. We talk about fiscal failure at national level. They don't give us rapid urbanization has not been addressed. She doesn't know what's going to happen in future. The district municipalities, its efficacy, the role Metro should play in subsidizing or cross-subsidizing struggling municipalities just across their borders. All these issues not been addressed. Rapid urbanization, if there's not going to be something done about it, dan gaan die platteland ontvolk en dan watter munisipaliteite hoop ons om dan daar te hê? Hulle gaan ontvolk. Tensy ons sê hierdie Beaufort Wes of Woester of wat ook al buite die metro moet ontwikkel word, dat hulle meer lewensvatbaar kan wees en die mense nie Kaap toe kom vir 'n werk nie, gaan die probleme aanhou. So I'm asking that if I'm not a member of this committee, unfortunately, but I take an interest in all committee work, and I think that you should look at the report and then the issues that's not covered, do our own research or request that research be done on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Murray. Your contribution is much appreciated. They're very poignant also. It directs our focus more broadly. Colleagues, I think Professor Jump alluded to the fact that they can provide us a more detailed presentation with regard to the city of Cape Town, and I think Honourable Moran raised the absence of a more sort of in-depth sort of analysis of the issues in Cape Town, and perhaps we could possibly, at some stage, get that sort of presentation that is specifically directed at the metro, because the metro is distinctly different from all the other 29 local and district municipalities. Honourable Maria, are you in agreement with that?
I am more than in agreement with it, but I'm at your leisure and the committee's pleasure. I'm in agreement with that, and thank you for indulging me.
Honourable Moran, you raised that.
I'm fully in agreement, Chairperson. Of course, if you, for instance, look at the Cape Metro and other municipalities, and if you look specifically into the agricultural businesses that surrounding by those, it's totally different when it compares to the Cape Metro, and one would like to see basically if there is an investigation into the Metro itself, the impact, for instance, that your higher tariffs and so forth have on those communities, and whether it's sustainable just to increase the tariffs and people have to pay, whether it's sustainable, and if people will be able to continue a longer period, basically to serve those services that they are supposed to pay. Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Moran. And lastly, a more detailed presentation about the energy resilience plan or program for the Western Cape with the National Provincial Treasury in terms of what the future holds for energy security within the Western Cape and its collaboration with certain municipalities, as alluded by Honourable Kamba Boycha. Right. So a presentation. And that, Honourable Kamba Boycha, are you in agreement with that?
Yeah, Chairperson, I'm in agreement, so we can put that as a request to the department.
So thank you. So having said that, we need to be mindful, colleagues, that these things are not going to happen very soon. We'll probably get the first report copy of the research report sooner than the presentations, because as we all know that we have local government elections, we have the after the elections we will have the annual reporting season. So in all probability, these presentations will only happen next. So bear with us, and we will see to what extent opportunity exists where we possibly could have the soonest as it's practically possible to have these presentations delivered to the committee. Okay. Honorable Barre, as you're leaving, thank you for your presence. Colleagues, then we have minutes of the meetings, of the previous meeting that we need to adopt. Johan? Johan Kutsia, you muted. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
There we go.
Thank you. The minutes of the 31st of August, presence, any amendments or additions? You can move up your hand. Okay, right, move on. It's basically this meeting just dealt with the department's response to the audit outcomes and what needs to be done. So that's the resolutions of the department. The resolutions that we, Paul is waiting in the lobby. The resolutions that we have sort of adopted at a time. Okay, right. Any amendments or additions to page number 2? If not, can I have a mover that we adopt the minutes? Honorable Maseko, move that we adopt the minutes.
Chair, I move that we adopt the minutes.
Thank you, Honorable Maseko. Any seconder for that? Thank you. We don't need a seconder. Thank you.
It's supported, yes.
Supported by Honorable van der Westhuizen. Thank you. Johan, is
Dis die tweede een, voorsitter.
Minutes of last week's meeting, or 2 weeks ago, in fact. Can you make it groter, Mark? Thank you. Can you move up? Right, page 1, the minutes of the 7th of September. Right, any amendments or additions? That is basically just where we considered and adopted the final mandate in relation to the municipal systems bill. There's not much to that meeting. It didn't last very long, just 50 minutes. Any additions? Proposal that we adopt? Honorable van der Westhuizen? Propose that we adopt. A seconder?
I second
that. Thank you. Thank you, Anne. And that's it, Jan. I think that brings us to the end of our meeting. Right.
Yes.
Allow me to thank you, Jan, for the logistical arrangements and all the work that you have done in making this possible. Colleagues, without you, all of us who's on the platform, Jan Vermeulen, Namfundu, Candice, Siraj, and our colleagues, thank you for your presence and your inputs and your assistance, and may you have a wonderful day ahead. And It's probably our last meeting until the annual reports, and may you have a successful local government elections. Thank you so much. Bye.